It should be recording now. I'm going to go ahead and get my slides going here. Share screen.
Do you want us to just interrupt with questions, or do you?
Yes,
want
feel free to ask
Okay.
questions here. Let me get this slideshow going. Okay, let me get this out of the way. There we go. Okay. I'm Julian Brown. I work for cPanel, and I work mostly in Perl, but I do other languages. And recently, I started doing some work with not GPT, but I'll go into it a little bit more here in a minute. I really didn't care about GPT and all that fun stuff, but my son, who's also a developer, set this whole thing up. We have a self-hosted llama site at home, and I wanted to go in and play with it because we had some ideas. But before we go, I'm actually going to bring up the program. Just give me a second here. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Second. And it is right here. All right, this you should see, Randall, do you see I have a program with like a terminal up? It's like a instruction response and stuff.
Terminal on the left side, and
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure. I didn't know if that was going to show up because it's RDP. But what I did is I asked my self-hosted llama, write a Perl module that uses any event handler to create a socket server that receives and sends requests and uses SSL. It's been running for a couple hours. It's still working here at the bottom. It has not finished, and I know that because you can see this orange band around the site. That means it's still calculating.
You even spelled receives wrong, and it figured out what to do, huh?
Yeah, and even then, here I have a grammar error. Where did I say here? That uses any event that to create.
Yeah, that's okay.
So it did pretty good. As you can see, it's actually starts writing some legitimate code. It's definitely got some flaws, and we will discuss some of that as we progress. So I'm going to go back to my slideshow here. Okay, hold on. Just give me 1 second. There we go. So I showed you the cupcakes. So as I was saying is I really didn't care about this subject before, but my son went in and set up this equipment. And so we're actually running a llama site inside our home. And then we've been talking about it. We decided to create this project, which I'm at the very beginning of right now. And we're collaborating on it. So let's first talk about why would we want a self-hosted GPT? First, I want to clarify, I'm not doing Chat GPT. I'm doing Llama, which is actually the stuff I think Meta created. And because Chat GPT is not public source, or there's no way to get it legally. But Llama, on the other hand, you can download. And so we did, and we got it all set up. And so when I say GPT, you can say Llama, it's the same thing in my particular parlance here. And the primary reason why you want to do a self-hosted one is that your private data and or your company's private data is going to go over the wire to Microsoft and OpenAI. And it actually says in the terms of service and privacy policy that they see it and they can use it for whatever they want. And there's no option to opt out unless you choose not to use the service. I will be using the service tonight to show you, but I wouldn't put anything on it that would compromise my company's proprietary stuff. So what does it take to self-host Llama in this particular case? Well, it needs RAM or VRAM. That is VRAM if you're using GPU to accelerate the GPT, or RAM if you're using the CPU-based one, or llama.cpp. And you need a lot of RAM. RAM requirements are basically and I noticed there's spelling errors on this page. I apologize. RAM requirements are, this is just a rule of thumb, so to speak. It's parameters times bytes per parameter plus the content text length. And we'll go over that in a little bit. But normally you have 32-bit precision, which is, these are actually floats. Okay. So they have a 32-bit float, they have 8-bit float and 4-bit float. And you can adjust your characters by this. So number of parameters times bytes parameter, which is based on this. And the context is the number of tokens that are fed in as context, and we can go over that as we progress. So what are your two choices? As I kind of alluded to, you have two ways to do it. You can use it with GPU, that is like an NVIDIA card, to manage your model, or you could use CPU to manage your model. GPU is going to be much faster to the point where it's actually something you can actually interact with. Whereas if you base it upon CPU, it could be excruciatingly slow, and you'll see that today. So how big really is it? So I asked Quora, or I Googled it, and the Quora question answer came up. And it says basically the standard model for ChatGPT uses 175 billion parameters. And the amount of RAM necessary to support that is close to a terabyte. So in order, if we were to run, if we could legally get a hold of GP3 for this model, we would have to have about a terabyte to support it. They go on to say that they have specialized computing clusters to manage this. This isn't even something I could even get equipment for to run something that large in a GPU environment. So let's talk about some things that I know. Okay, there are many models that you can apply into this language model scenario. Okay, some are big, some are large. Okay, some have those optimizations, because I was saying 32-bit, 8-bit, and 4-bit optimizations. And those choices, set how much memory is required. So like the big models like Alpaca LoRa 65B HF, which means 65 billion parameters. But there's also like Vicuna 13B. Vicuna is a popular one. It has 13 billion parameters. Others have 7 billion parameters. Typically, the ones that you could fit in a GPU are going to be the 13 or 7 billion ones. Okay. But the big ones like the 65 billion, you would not be able to run on that. Then with further optimizations, instead of 32-bit, use 8 or 4-bit. That helps reduce the memory size so that you can perhaps fit it into a GPU that's on your computer. Smaller models and optimized models can fit in the NVIDIA, but the big ones cannot. And Will Braswell, who's not here tonight, has a solutions where you can buy machines with pretty good GPU support that you can run these models on. Of course, not the biggest ones, but he has that capability, so you can contact him if you're interested.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Certainly.
So these numbers that you're talking about, I understand there's a phase where you're creating the model, and there's a phase where you're executing the model against a prompt. Is this just for that second part, or is this
yes, this is the operational portion of it, where you're using it to process the prompt. Training, although you can do it with our software, is a different problem, and I really don't have much knowledge on that process.
Okay, thanks.
My son knows a little more about it than I do, but I know very little about that process. So anyways, continuing on, what we do, what we want to do is I want to run the full-size models, 65 billion parameter models, because I expect that they're just going to work better in the environment. The smaller ones are not likely to work. Now, this is supposition, and I want to prove all this out. but I want to be able to run the full-size models. And basically, you can only run any of these on NVIDIA cards if you're using GPU. That's because all of this stuff is written in the CUDA libraries, which only work on the NVIDIA systems. So AMD or Intel video cards are not likely to be able to help you unless they figure out some sort of shim or compatibility layer. I don't know if they've solved that problem at this stage. And one of the big people out in the industry or space is a guy named The Bloke, and he's got a site and it's listed right there. And he knows how to convert these models so they can possibly be runnable. And you can take a look, but he's more than likely to be a person of respect that you can trust most of what he produces. So all that, let's continue on. Like I said, my goal here is to run the really big models, but I cannot, even with my setup here, I cannot run the biggest models. Like they were saying, 175 billion, there's no way I could run it on the equipment I've got. But what is our solution? Well, my son cobbled together using older hardware, an old R720, which is like a Dell, probably 2U or something. But we were able to get a 384 gigabytes of RAM on it. Okay, DDR3, but RAM. And RAM is what you need, or VRAM if you're using GPU. But let's go with RAM. So 384 allows me to run the 65 billion parameter models. Llama is also available as it's listed here, 7 billion, 13, 33, and there are some cases where they're using compatibility layers and stuff to put in the 40 billion parameter ones. But I doubt on my particular piece of equipment here, that I'd be able to run anything larger than what I've presented. The piece of software I'm using to support all this is something called Uba Booga. I hope I pronounced that right. It's up on GitHub. You can download it. They have single, click one installer, so you can install it on your equipment. We have this running on a Debian, a recent Debian. But once you get it in place, then you have to go find the models. So they have a wiki space, so you can go find out where to download the models. So you download the models and you can install them. So let's see how our cupcakes are doing. Give me a second. Okay. Okay. So like I said, this has been running. As you can see, it's continuing to output code. Now, what I asked it again is to use any handler and write a socket server that receives and sends requests. Okay, fine. And it's definitely has some problems. I've been watching it here, like here, the ciphers line. Part of it's good, part of it's total garbage. I don't know what's going on here. I also noticed some other things here, like self port H or something. I don't know why it says port H. It's port. And it should have curly cues around it, but it doesn't. So there are some issues. But some of this other code looks okay. I'm waiting for it to see how it progresses because it's writing a client handler now. And we will keep watching it as we progress here. So give me a second. Let's go back to the video, or the slides rather. Okay, so where are we going with this? Well, I'm trying to explore how could I use this in a real development environment. It would be awesome if I could get a properly GPU accelerated system, but like I said, I wanted to try the bigger model so I could check out the fidelity of the larger models versus the smaller models. As I was saying, you could get, if you have a beefier NVIDIA card, you could definitely run some of the models like the 13 billion or the 7 billion. To test this out, I have a real program that I wanted to run. I've been wanting to write this for years, but I'm lazy. Life gets in the way, that sort of thing. So sometimes I just don't feel like writing a program at home. But I also had other concerns. Is I didn't want to, I didn't know how I wanted to deliver this because I want this to run on Linux, obviously, but I also want it to run on Windows. And delivering software to a Windows environment when you're not in a Windows environment is a small nightmare. And I just didn't want to uh, deal with that problem. So that was part of my procrastination on this problem. And it's not the problem space I could write this in multiple languages without any problem. I could write it easily in Perl. I could write it in C++. I could write it in Python. I don't know Rust, so I couldn't write it in Rust, but it would be a good learning experience if I did write it in Rust or perhaps Go or something like that. But I always just procrastinated because of the Windows problem. But once this discussion with my son and I and the idea for this project came, then this is the perfect tool to use as a model of writing a real program with the help of a GPT assisted chatbot. So that's why I'm moving ahead. I'm skipping over the Windows problem for now. We'll solve the Windows problem at another time. So what is this program I want to write? This is a program I intend for a centerpiece of or an environment of other programs that would work together, and I call it Switchboard. It's not a complicated program. It's basically just an SSL socket server that would allow clients to connect. You would send in a protocol message, and unless it's a protocol message for the server itself, that same message would then be radiated to all other clients that are connected. And would have one other feature that if you're not connected and you reconnect, you could then query all the messages that have come in since you last disconnected so you could catch up to whatever's going on. Because I could see in a whole ecosystem of programs that could be use this as perhaps, I'm just guessing, but you could use it as notifications, it could be messaging, could be several things, but it would build its own ecosystem. And granted, there's probably things like this out there, but this is mine. So this is one I wanted to do for my own personal needs. But anyways,
I was going to say this sounds a lot like RabbitMQ or Zero.
It's kind of like a pub sub, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But I didn't want to necessarily bring in a pub sub because I thought about doing that.
Okay.
But anyways, the program is not a complex program. Yeah, you have to have expertise because you need to know how to do with sockets and SSL and stuff like that. But it's not really a complicated program. So we're going to write a paper, and I'm just at the research stage of this paper right now. So I've not progressed on this. I will progress on this paper and we'll write it. But what my portion of the paper is about is creating a methodology for using assisted development, where you use a chatbot to help you write the piece of code, and that you, the professional, would then, make the program, clean up the program, make it right, go back to the chatbot and say, here, modify this program to do this or that. But I kind of see it as like a senior programmer working with a very junior programmer. And when I mean junior programming, I mean a really junior programmer, still learning the language type of thing. And you'll see why on some of the code it generates. But the point is that you are the professional. You're the one that is putting this whole thing together, and it's still your responsibility, but you're using the GPT as an assistant. Okay, press. Okay. So that's the part I'm working. My son, on the other hand, has a different view of this, and so he's writing a different part of the paper. And what he's going to do is he wants to use. There's a concept out there and a solution out there. There's a program out there called Auto GPT that kind of automates things with a GPT like a program behind it. Okay, so And here again, I'm not talking about auto GPT. I'm talking about an auto GPT like process. So we write our own process type of thing, but it has the analogy of auto GPT, which writes tasks, executes tasks, it automates things, so on and so forth. So he was saying that he would use this GPT, auto GPT environment to analyze the problem. You would have to write out the requirements document, and then the auto GPT would then create some steps for it to do. Then it would end up passing those down, and each of those smaller steps would then be refined down to even further smaller steps. Then we would pick one of the models and generate code for each step, but then use the other models to code review the code that was there, and then have them make appropriate changes to the code. This is all theory, by the way. I don't think, after my experience with this, I'm not thinking that is as good as, I don't think the technology is quite there, at least for the self-hosted GPTs. Perhaps later, when I show you some of the chat GPT stuff, it might be doable there, but it is definitely not doable in what I've seen of the models I've seen so far. But that just means it's not there today. One of the things that my son has noticed is that every few days another model comes along that's better than the previous model, still within the parameter limits, but better. They've trained it better. They've targeted different ways of putting it together or whatever, and these now become the better or the chosen models. So this may improve over time. So, like I said,
Julian, sorry to interrupt. Can you just go back to the previous slide? Because I got to see it for like 2 seconds only.
this
And
slide,
nope, the one that was
this
previous.
one.
There you go. Okay. Is that the first slide, I assume?
Oh no, I'm quite a bit into
Okay.
it here. I've
Okay.
been for about 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
But I will be posting this up on YouTube, Will, and I've mentioned your name, and I'm glad you're here.
Well, if you mention my name, I would appreciate you telling me what you said right now.
Okay, I basically said that you could help people set up a GPU-based GPT type systems because you've kind of done that before, and you have the tools for doing that. And
Yes, that is correct.
so that I do know you do that, but that's not the point of the paper. I just said if they want a GPU solution, they can turn to you.
And what is the point of the paper?
Okay. What the paper portion that I'm working on this page, on this, going back to this slide, is I want to develop a methodology where we're using Chat GPT or some self-hosted GPT as an assisted development tool. Okay. How could I use it? How could the seasoned professional take advantage of this and do a good job? And from there, I actually perceived it to be like the relationship of a senior programmer to a very junior programmer who could do the actual, so you'd actually turn to the GPT to write the code, but the programmer would come in, the senior programmer would come in and fix the code, make the code fit better into the environment, that sort of thing. So that's the type of environment or methodology I'm trying to set up and prove that works. So the page, this is where I think you came in. I was talking about my son. My son wants to do an auto GPT process where the program would take your requirements, break it down into smaller steps, and then take those steps and write each one of those steps into smaller steps, and then eventually choose a model to generate code for each one of those steps, and then use other models to code review the code to improve the code to the point where it's going to work. And he wants it to be in almost completely automated mode. Like I said, I don't think the technology's there yet. It may eventually be there, but it's not quite there in my opinion. And again, that's my opinion. So this is a slide that I just left off on. And like I said, I'm in the preliminary steps in this research here. and I'm exploring many models. I've got a whole bunch of models downloaded onto this environment, and I'm checking out what the code quality is. I'm checking out different languages, see which ones work better, because my assumption is, and granted, that is an assumption. And here I'm mentioning your name again, that the hairs on the back of your head, Will, are going to stand up because I'm going to mention the snake language. That
Should I log out?
I would rather you stay.
Okay.
I'm targeting Perl. I want Perl to win. Okay. But one of the things that I'm going to mention is Python, C++, and Rust actually are likely to have more code in the common crawl, which is what these are based on, than probably Perl does, because I'm actually seeing the code that they write for those other languages looks a little better than the code that it writes for Perl. But that's, like I said, I'm in the early stages, and that's my assumptions. I want to prove or disprove that assumptions. And so I summarize some of that here. Common Crawl is it's a website out there, but it's essentially basically what robots.txt and spiders and stuff like that when search engines go out and grab all the stuff that's out there. Commoncrawl.org is where a lot of these models train their or where the models are trained on the stuff that's in the Common Crawl. Now, the Common Crawl has things other than code in it, obviously. This is all about language. So, it has, like English and, French and German and all that stuff, as well as C and Perl and all that other stuff here. So, and my assumption, again, is that Perl is going to be underrepresented, sorry, in the Common Crawl. I can't verify that because I'm not going to go through the Common Crawl on my own. And I would actually suspect that Python, being an extremely popular language, is going to be overrepresented. Not necessarily any of that code that it encounters is any good, because I've seen some rotten Python up there too. But, it's just more of it out there. And I'm saying that C++ and Rust are very popular languages as well. And so their code is probably going to be heavily represented out there. So that being said, I suspect Perl is not going to do as well. And I'm actually going to show you some of that tonight. ChatGPT works pretty damn well with Perl, okay? But some of the models I'm seeing in my self-hosted GPT are not doing as well. And maybe I haven't found the right models yet, because I've got a lot of models to go through. But I'm not as pleased with the Perl that I've been seeing. It has done some good work, but not all of it. So let's see how my cupcakes are doing. Give me 1 second here. We'll switch to the cupcakes. As Will, as I was saying earlier, I put this this into operation a long ago because I'm using a CPU solution, not a GPU solution. So this runs very, very slowly. But I put this in about 2 hours ago. It's still cooking. And basically, I asked it this question here. Write a Perl module that uses any event handler to create a socket server that receives and sends requests and uses SSL. I'm still going over it here. I'm seeing some problems. In general, it looks like it's structurally good, but there's a lot of problems here. Like, look at this ciphers line here. I have no idea what that is. I mean, the export, the ID, SIMDB5, those might be real things, but this null stuff, I don't think so. Plus, this line here has got a port H. I don't know what that's all about. We got other stuff that looks legit here. It's doing IO socket SSL. That's good. And I'm waiting on the part where it actually starts a handler events, because it's writing a handler client now. I want to actually see the event it actually produces. But this is not likely to finish while we're meeting. I just want you to see that it is working, but it is excruciatingly slow because I'm using a CPU-based solution. If you were using a GPU-based solution, it would actually be almost real time. And I'll show you that when I run ChatGPT, it actually pretty much does it. You could actually watch it generate it, and it's really cool. But not so much here in my environment. Okay, where am I here? Okay, check down the cupcakes. So let's go on. So let's see what has been found so far. Now, when I first started this, I did not read my son's instructions on how to use this. So I just plowed into it, started playing with it, and got some results. But I had actually chosen the worst of the worst model that performed slowest. It's already very slow, but it's slower than molasses in January, that type of thing. So it took me like 2 days to get it to write a piece of code. It wrote a fairly good piece of code. But here's the question I asked it here. It says, write a function in Python that creates an SSL socket, accepts connection requests, and uses threads to process requests on the socket. And as I was telling you earlier, I'm using the snake language because this was my first attempt at it. And I just assumed that the snake language would be overrepresented. So let's go take a look at the results that on that first run. So let me get my editor up. 1 second.
I'm glaring at your Python.
Well, I haven't showed it yet. It'll just take a minute. I got to get a.
To glare at your Python.
Okay. Yes, it's not my Python. It's the Falcon's Python. Okay, give me a second here. Perl Python socket. Python socket. There it is. Do. Okay, popped up on the wrong screen. I don't know if that's big enough for you to see. I can make it bigger if you want. Let's see. Is it Control plus? That doesn't.
The way that Zoom squeezes all the windows down, that's like a tiny microscopic unreadable thing.
You can't read this right now?
If I hide, let's see, if I hide the chat room, okay, I still have, let's see, how do I view only what you're sharing?
Okay,
Standard? Well, okay, yes, standard. Now it's bigger and I can barely read it. Yes, thank you.
Let me see if I can figure out how to get this bigger. This is GVim. I know there's a way to increase the font. I don't remember how. Do window. Okay. Equal size. It doesn't let me. Dang.
Just go ahead.
Okay. Well, anyways, like I said, the question was I asked it to write a socket server, and here it is. And I'm not a Python expert. I will say that. But it looks like it's doing the right thing. It sets up a Python class called SSL server. It's bringing in, it's a, not a subclass, what do you call it? Yeah, it has parent classes it's mixing in one of its parents is TCP server and another parent is thread mixin, okay, which has some of its capabilities in it. And it's creating it here. It's identifying a key file and a cert file, which is great. So like I said, I want it to be SSL. Get a request. It runs a subclass, or creates a subclass called SSL request handler. It does things. I mean, the code looks good. I can't really evaluate it, but it looks clean. It seems to have covered the everything I asked it to do. But I have not tried to run it. I did check it, did with a Python syntax checker, and it was syntactically correct. So let's go back to where I was. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. So
I would like to just say, if you haven't run the code, then there's really no judging it. A syntax check is nice, but doesn't mean that it actually runs or does anything.
And I fully agree, Will. And like I said, I'm in the initial research of this thing, and I'm going to be showing quite a few pieces of code that I've generated. And I'm looking at structure, and if it even is syntactically correct, a lot of what I've seen is not syntactically correct, much less functional. So I switched. That particular one was the Falcon 40 billion parameter. I then switched to a 65 billion parameter one. It's alpaca something. I'll have to look it up. And I looked at some code. I asked it basically the same question, but about Perl. And I will be asking that basically that same question, slightly modified several times tonight on different models, and you're going to see the different results that it generates. When I generated this piece of code, I saw some missing pieces or incorrect Perl syntax. So I said, please revise the model. And so I did a subsequent submit, and we would go on. So let me go bring that piece of code up. There it is. And that's Perl socket. Okay. So now I'm running that same question. This is the result of that same question. It's actually a pretty succinct piece of code. It's not bad. Okay. It ignore. I didn't ask for, or I did ask for SSL. It did create SSL, but it did not include anything about the server cert or key or anything like that. But the code looked pretty good because it's basically sitting in. It creates, and every time it gets an accept, it would then fork off. But it should immediately on the fork off. It didn't do the PID, so we would then write the part that actually receives and does the needful for each of the fork processes. So it left quite a bit to be desired. So I modified it a little bit. So I modified the question and I said to the chat GPT, well, to my llama, it says, modify this Perl script. And I included the Perl script that was previously written. When it calls fork, it needs to check the return value. If the return value is 0, call a function called process request and pass it $client. If the return value is not 0, then close the client. So like here, we're talking about the fork process, because like when you say fork a process, you get it back either a PID or a value of 0. If your value is a PID, then you're the parent. So you don't need that FD anymore, so you can close that FD or the client. But if the other scenario is you're PID 0, that means you're the child, so you need to go in and do your needful things. So here's where I said, okay, do that. Take that piece of code and modify it. So the response was pretty good. It said here, it's still not doing the part about the SSL certs, but it did exactly what I asked it to do. Okay, it checked the value of the fork, but it smartly used the bang fork instead of PID equals 0 or whatever. That was good. And so if it's not fork, as in 0, call process request. So it did exactly what I wanted. This is actually some of the best I've seen in this whole process, and that was an alpaca 65 billion parameter model. And I'll show you a lot of more of the models next time we go back to the thing. So, oops, I'll go back one. So I was toying with the idea. I've created all these fork processes now to look at the various to operate the particular thread. Instead of threads, I have to use fork processes in Perl because we all know that our beloved language doesn't do threads well. But I want to still get a message to those fork processes, say, hey, I need you to relay to that FD the new messages that have come in. So I was looking up some things. I asked some questions to Google and stuff like that. And I saw this really cool cheap pub sub. Now I know Randall, you bringing up RabbitMQ or ZeroMQ or something like that, and I could easily use that here too. And I probably am going to end up and write this with like ZeroMQ because it really is the right way to go about this particular thing. But I'm still following my road. I'm going to go down this road until I've exhausted my opportunities. So this cheap pub sub idea that someone had is basically using a broadcast UDP socket where you send you as the publisher would write to this socket, in this case a UDP socket, and it would then broadcast it out to all the clients. It's I'll have to bring up the details, but it's basically you go to It's the way you set up the socket. So it's SO broadcast and a bunch of other things. And it's built into the socketing system. So it's part of nature, the nature of sockets. So it's not something that's a rocket science or anything like that. So I wanted to do that. And I then I modified the question, and it really did not do a very good job. And it's the same model that wrote a very good piece of code earlier. Did not do such a good job on this, and I'll show you that right now. So where did my thing go? So Perl pub sub is the file. So here, I told it write a Perl module, and the 40 or the 65 billion a packet did a terrible job, because look at the syntax. It says module UDP module curly Q. That's not even Perl syntax. I don't know. It must have confused some other language's syntax. Now, I could have thought maybe he was trying to set up a package, because you could say package and call it UDP module. That's probably what it should have been. Some of this code wasn't bad, but the syntax was just forget it.
That was just the syntax that the language model wished that we had in Perl.
Right, but you could have easily done it by saying package, because you could put multiple packages in a single profile. We all know that.
Yeah.
But the language model, this particular language model, fell apart. But that doesn't mean that there isn't good solutions. I'm just saying this particular, the Alpaca 65 billion, did not do a good job. But the code itself isn't bad underneath the hood, so to speak. So I came back to it and I gave it back some more things. So I changed the language writer from write a Perl module to write a Perl package. Lo and behold, that did better. But so here's the new revised question. It says, write a Perl package that contains the following functions. Write a function that creates a UDP socket with SO broadcast flag set that is bound to localhost. Write a function that connects to a UDP socket that will receive broadcast, and write a function that writes a string to a UDP socket and is broadcast. I guess broadcasted would have been grammatically better. So this piece of code isn't too bad. He notices he's using package instead of module, which is so much better. And the create socket looks pretty good. He's still not putting in the certs. But well, actually, no, that's not a problem, because this did not need to be SSL, but the other one did. So that was okay. So I have the create the socket. It wrote a function called connect to the UDP socket, and it had the function send message, and it seemed to do pretty darn good. So I guess I forgot to tell it to write the receive message, but neither here nor there. The code, under the most part, wasn't too bad. So I was kind of pleased with that environment here. So let's continue on. Okay. So what would the snake language look like if I asked it basically the same question? So let's look at asking that same question to the snake language. So let me go get my editor back up. So it's Python pub sub.
Prepare to glare.
That's right. Okay. So the question I asked it here on line 14 is, write a Python module that contains the following functions. Write a function that creates a UDP socket with SO broadcast flag, which binds to localhost and port 9999. Write a function that connects to a UDP socket. Write a function that writes a string to a UDP socket, and write a function that reads a fixed length string from a UDP socket. So here's the code. It wrote the function called create a socket. As far as I can tell, it looks good. I did not go ahead and try and run these things, because that's not my purpose at this stage. But it looks functionally correct. I'm not a Python expert. So connect to UDP socket function looks pretty good. It's creating a connection and doing a thing. It has exceptions. I like having exceptions in there. So write a string to a UDP socket and read a fixed length string from UDP socket. It looks, I don't know if it would actually work. I mean, we all know we write perfect code and then we actually go try to turn it on and it doesn't work. But, that's us. But, this code does seem to look functional. So let's continue. So I said to myself, and I knew it was me because I was wearing my clothes. But anyways, what would C++ do? I already know how to use C++, and I actually like the code it generated. I personally would have used Boost libraries. It didn't use the Boost libraries, which is analogous to C++, and now it's analogous to CTAN. And but the code looked fairly good. So let's go bring that up. There it is. Okay, C++ socket. Go. So I said, write a C++ socket, write a C++ class that creates an SSL socket and accepts connection requests and uses threads to process requests on the socket. So it started off, it wrote the class. Notice it did not do any of the includes that would necessarily be for C++, but I'm going to ignore that for now. But it wrote a class. It's not based on another class, so it's a baby class. It has a function called accept connection. It looks good. It's been a while. I have to go over through the socket stuff, but it's looking good from all the various sockets and flags set. This is not the pub sub thing. This is the original problem, by the way. And then it sits in a while loop here and does the accept thing. And when the accept comes in, it writes, it creates a thread and gives it the process request function. And that also looks good. But like I said, when, I haven't compiled it, I haven't tried to run it because I have to actually put together a series, an environment, an ecosystem to run these in. And that would actually be my next problem, is write the ecosystem so I could test individual pieces of code. Oops, yeah. So that's most of what I've run into. So let's go back temporarily back to my cupcakes, and it's continuing to write this. And as for the later arrivers, this is I'm running my Llama, which is the GPT equivalent, on CPU instead of GPU. So it takes a very long time, and this has been running for hours. It's still the original question I asked it was write a Perl module that uses any event : handler to create a socket server that receives and sends requests and use SSL. The code has some problems. It looks structurally sound, but definitely has some problems. But it is continuing to write the code. It's now written, or mostly written, it looks like the handler, the client handler. I don't know how this is going to work, but like this, I'm trying to see, is it actually calling? I mean, it uses any event. Let's see if it's actually calling or doing anything with any event in here. Socket is just an IO socket. Okay, add a handler. Okay. I guess there's some stuff built into IO socket I'm not familiar with. Okay. So I mean, it's still working. So then there's more work I've done, but besides that I didn't get into my slides because I've been working since I wrote these slides. So let's look at this thing I wrote or did earlier. Let me go see what I do with this one here. I already have that one open. Never mind. I must have that one open. Give me a second. Okay, Hartford. Is that it? Yeah. Oh, the Hartford one, that's because I'm using the Hartford model. So that's actually what I'm running in the background right now. Okay, so that one's not a biggie. Let's see. Okay. I also asked it to write this in Rust. So, okay. So that same question I asked to Perl, Python, and C++. I now am asking to Rust. And I know almost nothing about Rust. I was hoping somebody would join us that speaks Rust. But this is the code, the question I asked it is, write in Rust a program that creates an SSL socket, accepts connection requests, and uses threads to process requests on the socket. It does say SSL in my question. I don't know if it did. Let's go see. It looks pretty succinct. So it's calling in a bunch of modules, I guess. Uses would be analogous to includes in C++, I suppose. It's creating a TCP stream. That's good on port 443. Anytime you mention the word SSL, it seems to want to put it on 443, which is, I guess, fair because most everybody writes an HTTPS model. Okay, so I don't know if this code's any good at all. I don't see threads in there, but it may be in here. I just don't understand how Rust works. So that's that. Anyways, I showed that. Let's continue here. Is there something else I haven't shown? Oh, okay. So let's go look at it from the GPT environment here. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to open this. I've already ran it, but let's go run this problem because I actually think the best piece of code I've seen so far was written by GPT, or Chat GPT, that is. Now I'm going to bring up my browser that I brought it up in. Where's Edge? Edge. There we go. So in here, my access to GPT is through Bing. I don't know what limitations are there, other than the fact that it is, public. So anything I type over here, this thing is going to be made public to OpenAI and Microsoft, and they say that in the terms of service. And I'm asking it to use the more precise mechanism. It has three mechanisms: creative, balanced, and precise. And since we're programmers, we like precise. So here's the question I'm asking it. Oh, that is not the right one. Excuse me. That's rushed. Let me get the question. Where is it? Okay. Is it here? Okay, let's open this. Okay. I apologize. I have it over here in this window.
As I recall, the two right tabs there, so creative is GPT-4 and the other two are only GPT-3 with some enhancements.
It could very well be. I don't know the
That's what I've
distinct.
heard. That's what I've heard.
Okay, there we go. Bring the Bing back up. Okay, here's the question. All right, so write a Perl module that creates an SSL socket and accepts connections requests and forks to process requests on the socket. Hit send. And it pretty much runs this in real time, unlike my self-hosted environment. Here you can see it's going to town. And we'll review that code here in a minute. Just let it run its course. Okay. Okay, so it's finished.
Congratulations, because it actually finished the code. I've had so many times where it stops halfway through and I have to say continue, and then it's difficult splicing.
Well, I actually have that environment in my environment too. But let's look at the code that it generates. It properly sets up a package, my SSL server. That's cool. Brings in IO socket SSL. It's using syswait. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so anyways, it's a new class. Okay, it creates a server socket, I guess, based on, okay, it has a listen port. I guess port is going to come in through the ARGs. You would have to pass in the ARGs. You'd be a CCP, of course. You could pass in, or you'd also pass in your key file and cert file. Good. That is very good. And return self after the bless. Very good. Very good. Now, the run is okay. So it gets the self. Okay. Then it sits on the client except. Oh, excellent. and gets the fork, PID process, waits on PID, because this is a parent process, right? And it waits on the PID. See, he closes the client and just waits for that client to finish and then fires off. Okay, so it's not perfect because I wanted it to, because this thing is going to do one at a time. Okay, so we may have to ask it subsequent questions to improve on this because I don't want it to, I'd like to accept to be running in a thread, or not a thread, but just keep firing off. Process request, do your thing. So I mean, it's pretty good code, but it may have lost in translation the part that I don't want it to accept one connection and just continue on that one only. I want it to be able to have multiple connections. So I'm going to have to ask, improve on the question, or have it modify this piece of code. So, okay, so back to my original thing is I want to prepare a methodology where I could use one of these and use it as a junior program. And I think it's doable. I have to find better, I'm still working on models that work best in my self-hosted environment, because again, the reason why I want to use the self-hosted environment is because I don't want Microsoft and OpenAI to have, my proprietary information, because it would go over the wire and they could read it. And they could then use it again for their purposes, like if they retrain their models or whatever. That's not what I want. It's not what your employer, if you're currently employed, would want, because this is proprietary stuff that you're writing. You don't want the world to have it. So that's the reason why you'd want to do this. So let me take a tour of the little program that we got. This program again is Uba Booga. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's up on GitHub. Earlier slides, I gave the URL to the GitHub site, and it's pretty easy to install on Linux. It's a bear to install on Windows. I never got it working on Windows, by the way. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. I just couldn't figure it out. But the one-click installer works perfectly on Debian, and we're running it on Debian. But like I said, we've got a ton of RAM because we wanted to run the larger models. So I'm on the tab here called text generation. This is where you interact with the model, and you put your question here on the left and your output comes out on the right. And Randall, you'll see here, I have a continue button here because I have set the maximum token context to be 1,000. Usually defaults to 200, but I found when I increase the token size, the context size, it tends to make me hit continue far less. But original default was 200, so I was hitting continue more often than I wanted to. But there was only one case that it actually just refused to answer my question. And I'm not going to bring it up because it's probably just a bad model or whatever. But the models that I've got loaded on this environment are here on this model tab, and you can switch back and forth between them. These are the models that we have loaded currently. The one I originally started with, and I had pretty good luck on, is this Alpaca LoRa 65B, or 65 billion parameter. I don't know what HF stands for. The current one I'm using that's being generated is a 30 billion. It's called eHartford Wizard. I also played with Falcon 40B. It is the slowest of the slowest of the slow, but it did pretty good. There's this Guanaco, which I didn't have much luck with. I haven't tried a good portion of these because, I just haven't had enough time to do it all. But you can see there are different ones with different parameter sets, like 7 billion here, 13 billion here, 7 billion, 13 billion. Vicuna is a popular one out there, and their best model is going to be a 13 billion one. There's Alpaca. There's different versions of the Alpaca. I don't know what the GGML or GPTQ stand for. My son does, and they just mean different things. They might be optimizations, because here it's saying 4-bit, which is 65 billion parameters using a 4-bit optimization. I don't know what size of memory you need, but that might fit in an NVIDIA. I don't know. Another 13 billion Vicuna, and a couple others here. So you play with that. Then there's other things you can do with it, because once you select it here from the model, you would say load model, but you'd have to make sure that you're stopped. I'm currently running, so it would resist me from making any changes. But once it's stopped, either you manually stop it or it's done, you could then pick the model and load it, and it takes time to load. Like when I loaded that one, it should be on this screen here. Yeah, when I loaded that one there, the E Hartford one, it took 600 seconds. What is that? 5 minutes, 10 minutes to load. That's just loaded into memory so it could do the work. But here's things you could play with. I don't know what any of these things do. You have to know what you're doing if you want to play with these parameters. But these are things that you could play with. Also, if you're into training, it does have the training tools. And so you could read up here. I don't know anything about training. That's not what I did. My son knows a little bit more about that than I do. And here's some other things. I don't know what all those are. But that's it in a nutshell. So if you have a lot of RAM or you have a good GPU card, you could probably run this tool on a Debian or other Linux and start playing with it. You would have to probably stick to the smaller models or optimized models, but you could actually get some stuff that you could do some analysis with. And your stuff is going to be private. Nothing will go to Microsoft. Nothing will go to OpenAPI. You don't want it to go to OpenAPI, that is. But on the other hand, you know, that ChatGPT is a good solution. It seems to write pretty dang good code. When you were doing that Skylearn thing, Will, a couple months back, were you using ChatGPT, or were you using Copilot for code generation?
That was using the now decommissioned Codex model that was owned by OpenAI, but is no longer available.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. If you go to places like OpenAPI or Microsoft, they change the rules on you all the time. And that brings up another point. I was going to put a slide in and I forgot to about this, but even the models that I have chosen here, they have licensing restrictions. Llama has basically, this is almost all built on Llama, has a restriction of, these are supposed to be research only. I think they've recently changed some of their licensing so it can be more private enterprise friendly, however you would put that wording. But you got to be very careful on both the underlying model that you're using, like Guanaco 65B or whatever, as well as the model that you're using to run your model, or the platform you're running your model on. So check both licensing, that it is going to be enterprise friendly or whatever your usage requirements are friendly. So check the licensing. But of the models I've seen some things that make me excited a little bit. I've seen some things that made me, you got to be kidding me, like that when the Perl used the model wrote some Perl with the word, module in it. That didn't work out right. But some of them are just not well trained. And I honestly think it's because there may not be enough Perl code out there on the net. And what I'm wondering is if we could somehow get all of the code that's up on CPAN and somehow make sure it's all in the common crawl, that would be helpful. I have absolutely no idea how to make any of that happen, but it would help Perl to work better in this environment. And that's basically it. You guys have any questions? I'll be glad to talk about whatever y'all want in this regard, but that's what I've got.
Nice presentation.
Thank you. And like I said, I've recorded it, and I will make sure it's up on the YouTube probably tomorrow, and I'll get my slides up there at an appropriate point too.
Great.
I'm going to stop my share.
Uh,
Okay, so any questions?
Yeah. Do you think this, or is it maybe this is one of your goals, to be able to import this basically into cPanel and use it for cPanel proprietary code since it won't get out?
Right. That's my goal, Andrew.
Okay.
And
I missed the
I
very
don't think obviously I have to get it past the DevOps team, which means I have to solve the licensing problems. So originally the only really way to run the CPU based one was with Llama, which was run by Meta, and they had a very restrictive research only license. My son seems to think they've changed that model where maybe more enterprise friendly than it was before. I'll have to check that out. Plus, there are other platforms out there that I have not actually ran, but are similar to what I've showed you here, that have a more enterprise friendly license. So that mixed with the model we choose, because the model has its own license as well. And so we have to make sure the model that we choose or models that we choose also have something that's friendly to the environment or the enterprise. And that could be, yeah, we have to write them a check, but we can use it type of thing. And that's something that cPanel would entertain. They may not opt for it, but they might entertain it. But that would be my goal. But I got to get this process smoothed out because I ran, as you can see, some of the code. I don't know when you joined us, Andrew, but I saw some pretty crappy code generated. I've seen some great code written, but none of the Perl code was perfect, where I could actually run the program. Some of the code that I wrote, like in C++ and Rust, were much closer, or Python, were much closer to be runnable. I didn't actually try to run them, as Will points out. I did check the syntax on some of them. I didn't check all of them on syntax. They typically were syntactically correct. At least the Python was. The C++ was not, because it didn't have the include statements. But I figured I could get around that pretty quick. But looking at the C++, it looked legit. And I don't know enough about Rust to see if that Rust code that I generated was worth a plug nickel or not. But I was kind of hoping somebody who actually spoke Rust could evaluate it, but I don't know if anybody here can speak Rust or not.
Nope.
So, yeah. And of course, Will only speaks one language, and that's Perl.
I had to use a lot of C and C++ to write the Perl compiler.
That's right. Back when, yeah, that's right. So, and other tools too. So, yeah, I think the process needs to be worked out a little bit more, and that's really kind of the goal of, because I don't know when I don't know when you joined this, Andrew, but the purpose of this is I'm writing a paper. My son is writing another portion of the paper, and we're trying to figure out methodologies that this actually would be useful. Right now, it's actually painful to use. And a lot of it may be, the technology needs to be improved. These models are improving every day. Every week, as my son points out, there's a new king in the model market. And so this may just be something another year or two before it's really ready. But I think it's something that is legit. It just needs we just need to smooth that out a bit.
Well, the Rust looked fine. Wait, can you hear me?
When I was displaying that Rust? Okay.
Yeah, it looked fine from what I've seen of people doing like streams of Rust coding. But in the Python, I noticed that it was missing like parameters to pass in the host and the port.
Okay, well, stay with me 1 second here. And
it didn't look like it was passing in the parameters for host and port. It just
had
them as like, but I was gonna say, have you seen I've seen a lot of people use this library. It's called LangChain, and it basically implements a kind of methodology for doing looping through output in order to like automatically improve it.
Yeah,
Like-
that's kind of like where my son wants to go with this. He wants to
Mhm.
use these models to continually improve, like have like one model against another model. One does the code, one does the code review, and then they repair it.
Yeah, and they have basically output parsing. They have code that does output parsing, extracts it out, and then you can use another tool like call it out to a compiler or an interpreter,
right,
and then get the error out of that, and then tell it the model, go feed that back into the model. They have
right, and that's where my son wants to go with it. I'm still seeing this as a little ugly. Yep, I'm concentrating on what can I do with Perl. But the other languages seem to be doing better, but I did not notice the errors in the Python that you pointed out. So Snake is not my favorite language. And I agree with Will on that one.
I've seen, I've seen other, I think it was with Copilot, somebody doing a review of Copilot output, and they were showing in particular that it just isn't, I don't know if this is the case with other things, but it didn't understand what is actually inside of like units, right? Like what is the unit of this variable? It knows it's a type, what type it is, but what is a unit? So then you can't really you further calculations that are valid on that. And then I saw another one which was with actually using Chat GPT-4, and it didn't understand encodings. So it doesn't know what's actually inside the variable. It can like spit out valid code, but if you don't know what's actually in the variable to that level of detail, like how is it actually encoded, then it becomes invalid because so that's what I've seen with the code. I have not used these models myself or any AI
well,
code generation.
I've only been into it for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah.
So I mean, this tool that my son found that I was showing you made it to the point where I could actually do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
I had played with the Chat GPT on Bing before, but it was like, he asked it a stupid question, like write the socket server, and it just gets something that we found out on Stack Overflow. It was pretty obvious it did that.
Yeah.
But I asked it very specific things about a socket server, and it did some of it, but it was not functional code. But if we use it as,
I think that Perl was actually might have been correct. That weight PID with the W no hang, it's non-blocking, so it would have actually.
Oh, so, then it may have been correct. And let me see if I can find that. Which one it again was it?
That's why. Yeah, that's why it had to do the POSIX.
I've had a bunch of them here. Is this the one with that POSIX? Let me go see. Nope, this is not the one with POSIX.
I think it was in Chat GPT. It was in the Bing.
GPT, okay. Let me go find
in your browser, I believe.
Yeah, I know, but it's hiding right now. There's my browsers. Oh, did I? Oh, it's going to be this browser. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's
so at the bottom it had a -1 no hang, and so it should be non-blocking.
All right. Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that means it's probably functional code. I mean, yeah, we'd have to test it and all, but yeah. But
now it would be interesting to actually have it write the tests as well.
Okay.
Because tests are usually, when you're writing tests, you want them to be simpler than the original code.
Well, see, that's the other part of this problem is we need really an environment to play with. And an environment, like you say, is go back to the original concept of test-driven development is you write the test first, then you write the code, or you write the test and then you ask GPT to write the code and you run the test or code against the test.
Right.
Type thing might be a good methodology for this type of tool.
Yeah.
But I'm learning and I'm trying to figure this out. And again, my goal is, and I wanted Andrew kind of caught that, is where we could safely put this inside our proprietary environments, and Microsoft and OpenAI will not get our results or
Yeah.
our questions. We don't want that. So
I also just sent a link. There's a ML for code GitHub website, which is just compiling papers out there. Often they're preprint, so you can access them for free.
oh, very good.
It has for different tasks papers out there, so you can like survey a particular thing you're looking for that way.
Right. I might be able to follow up on some other person's work. Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been updated, but yeah. I mean, this is actually an area that Microsoft Research has been doing for a long time, because a lot of their stuff is at Microsoft Research. They like do things that combine with like the Visual Studio environment, so they try to make extensions there. So a lot of them, there is like a history of doing this even before LLMs existed.
Right. Well, I mean, Copilot came before ChatGPT, or at least when ChatGPT was public.
Yeah.
So, and Copilot wasn't a bad program; it's a pretty good program. We can talk about the ethics of it, but nonetheless,
yeah. It's one of the reasons why I haven't started using them myself. I would like to do more of the local type of things than I would, for the same reason. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Is any other comments or questions by anybody? Cool. Well, if there's anything else somebody wants to talk about, feel free to jump in.
I actually was going to ask, have you looked at other models besides Llama that are open source?
No, every one of those models that I showed were Llama compatible, I guess, except the one. But that one had a compatibility layer so we could run it on Llama. But yes, there are other platforms like Llama that you could run, and they have different licensing restrictions, and some would be more enterprise friendly than others. And right now, I don't know what the state of the Llama license is. It's gone through multiple states, but I think it's becoming more friendly to the enterprise.
Yeah, just
okay. Hold on, my son's telling me that Llama may not be an option. Okay, for the enterprise, but there you go.
There's I just asked Bard, and it said Pythia, Dolly, Delight, Stable LM, Diallo GPT, and those are all under like Apache or MIT licenses.
Those are excellent licenses, yeah, for what we wanted to.
Right.
And so I may want to play with those too. Excellent.
Yeah, Bard's pretty good at sorting things out if you're just looking for a place to check things out and also compare things. It just, I guess, like last week or something, it became publicly available.
Okay, so what is it like? I just Google Bard.
Bard.google.com.
Oh, it's at Google. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I was on a private beta for a while, and I really sort of liked what it was doing. And just recently, they made it even smarter. They're really emphasizing putting code into it so that it can really handle more programming problems.
Yeah, that's what I want to see, and I would like to see it perform better with Perl.
Yeah,
like the GPT, Zach, you pointed out that I may have misinterpreted some of the things, but I was not as happy with the Perl that the other models that I were using was generating.
Right.
But that's those models. They're not there, but every day they're coming up with new models or improved models. And hopefully, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I would be hoping that for its Perl knowledge, it's grabbing it from all of CPAN, all the code that's out in CPAN land.
I
I
can't
don't know if
imagine
that's
people aren't crawling the CPAN. I'm sure they're crawling the CPAN.
that. I would
Most-
hope so, Randall, because that would be the best
Yeah.
source. Because I know that's how, like when they do new releases, they run it against all of CPAN to see if it's a feasible thing.
Well, you'd
So,
be able to tell by just saying into Google search, site metacpan.com and see, and then ask for something that you know is only in like a documentation page of a module.
right.
And if the site narrowing gives you, results, then obviously they're crawling it.
Okay.
That's a good test to see whether people are crawling your sites or not. Is to use a site restriction on a query. Good stuff.
If you want to see an example of language where it doesn't do it as well, you could do Prolog, because
Yeah.
Prolog often they teach it in universities, so a lot of the example code out there is written by beginners, and then there's the small group of people who are professionals in it, and there's not that much code out
Well,
there.
so you're saying that's a very underrepresented language, is what you're saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Even though it's rather old, right?
Yeah, I was
should.
working on it in the 90s, but I was an amateur in Prolog when I was working on it, although I was a professional programmer. So,
I've always said that, if they're using, for example, Stack Overflow as a source, you're going to end up with an inverted bell curve of really, really crappy examples and a bunch of really great answers and nothing in between. So it'll
Right.
be this inverted bell curve.
yeah, I don't know, but I would definitely like it to have improved Perl response.
Yeah.
That's the right terminology. But, and, I don't know, Randall, you might be right about it using MetaCpan for its sourcing. I don't know if it is. It'd be really cool if I could understand that, but I'm not an expert on this. My son's more of an expert. Will's more of an expert on that side of it than I am.
Yeah. Bard also has the additional feature, if you don't mind having a Gmail account, because you also have to have a Gmail account in order to log into Bard.
That's not a problem. I have a Gmail account.
Yeah, right. But for some people on this call, that's a problem. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Oh, okay.
And but if you have a Gmail account and you ask for something that shows up in a table or maybe a series of slides, it can automatically write that to Google Sheets for you.
Oh, okay.
So it saves it right to your sheet. So you see a table of things like I just asked yesterday for a list of the US presidents the list of the US states and when they were admitted to the union and their size. And it created this nicely formatted table. And then at the corner, it says save to sheets. I pressed save to sheets. Boom. There I had a Google sheet that was exactly that information for me.
Oh, that is sweet. Yeah.
It is nice. It is nice because you can get it to do a table of just about everything, provided you ask, make a table of, and it's pretty good
Right.
at then following your instructions instead of just talking about it in text like it often does. Yeah, Bard's definitely coming along. It's nice that we have these two big corporations and three if you count Amazon, but all competing to try to get to that brass ring of being general AI.
Yeah.
So we've got, Microsoft OpenAI Alliance on one side.
Well, Meta's in that game too. That's where Llama came from, the Meta
Yeah,
people.
well, it's true. Meta's definitely a player too. If they ever get their act together again, but
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get into the politics of the corporate.
no,
But
yeah, I shouldn't have even gone there. But Google had a bunch of AI announcements last month at I/O, and one of the things they announced was the models they're using coming out of the Google AI thing, not open source, unfortunately, but their smallest model, Gecko, is small enough to run on phones.
Oh, really?
So they've got, they can put AI on phones now, and it's that's why I was asking you about requirements and things. So I was thinking about maybe there's other models that actually can fit on smaller spaces, but nothing out of Google because nothing out of Google apparently.
Well, the models I was showing you, the smallest one had 7 billion parameters,
Right.
but you could have the 4-bit optimization, which means it would be 0.4 or So it'd be the 7 billion divided by 2 essentially, which is like 3.5 billion plus, you know, a little bit. So that's how much memory you'd have to have, like 4 gigs to run it.
Yeah,
Theoretically,
a little rough. Yeah,
you know how theory goes. That's just a rule of thumb type of thing.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, good stuff. Good working. Be sure you keep us posted in future meetings. I want to see where this goes.
Yeah. And actually, now that you come to think about future meetings, I'm probably not going to have Perl Mongers in July because we have the Perl conference. I don't want to distract from the Perl conference. And we'll meet again probably in August. So that's just where I'm thinking. Now, if somebody wants it, we can have it, but I don't want to distract from the Perl conference. So are any of y'all going to the Perl conference by any chance? Will's going? Okay.
I can't go because it's in Canada.
You can't go to, oh, because you're what we discussed earlier.
I'm an expunged felon,
Yeah.
but they don't believe in the expunged part, so I'm still a felon.
Well, I don't know the legalities of that either, Randall.
Expunged means it's legally sealed. I can tell you right now, today, I've never been convicted of a felony, and it's
Okay.
perfectly legal for me to say that. But
Okay.
that's not the way it shows up on my Wikipedia page or the way that Canada and Australia don't respect that expungement.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So I can't go to Canada or Australia. I've been in 200 countries, but I can't go to Canada and Australia. No, 100 countries, sorry, not 200. It's silly.
That's a lot of countries either way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been to both Canada and Australia. In fact, Australia like 6 or 7 times. But as soon as they figured out about my conviction, they said, nope, you don't get any
Nope.
permits anymore. Yep.
Right.
Apparently they're full on their quota of felons.
Gotcha.
I tried to
No
go
more
to
felons.
I tried to go to Canada once, and the Olympics were there at the time, and I guess they were just stricter, and they pulled me aside and said that I couldn't come in. Wouldn't really tell me what exactly why or whatever, but I did manage to go to the border patrol there and say, "Thank God you stopped me from coming into your country before I spent any money here."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, border people are crazy sometimes. They don't always make sense,
Well, it's because they're following rules that don't make sense.
perhaps.
Almost always. It's the whim of things. It's like the politicians who keep changing daylight saving time.
I would just ask that they either remove it or make it permanent. I don't care which, but
A lot of people wish that. A lot
know.
not happening anytime soon, except in a few places.
Yeah. Well, they almost had it passed, but the whatever, I don't know if it was Biden was president at the time, but it didn't get signed. So I don't know what the hell that problem was.
It's signed at the federal level in the sense that if any state, oh no, it's not quite signed at the federal level. You're right. Yeah. But it was set such that a state could on their own opt into permanent DST, which I actually disagree with because it puts things too far forward and back. I've seen diagrams of the US and how many people would be going to work in the dark for more of the year if it's set that way.
Yeah, but it's arbitrary which way you go. So
Right. And it's also arbitrary what time you go to work too. It's just
yeah,
everybody in
true.
that area has to agree what the time is.
I
Right.
don't understand why people are so afraid of dark.
Yeah, that's true too. But I mean, it's like, why not have the sun be overhead at noon? That just because that's arbitrary anyway as well. So why not just leave it that way? So therefore your sundials don't have to move. Who's going to pay for all those sundials to be rotated? if it's permanent DST, I want to know. That has to be part of the cost of doing that.
Right.
All those sundials out there still, wherever they are. Off by an hour.
I think we're getting a little loopy here, but
No,
Yeah.
I was waiting for the next Perl clip thing to come along, but sure. Anybody got a Perl thing? I'm still doing Perl occasionally, but I'm mostly converting them into
Yeah.
Flutter.
Well,
Well-
every moment of every day, if that's what you're asking, including right now, yes.
Mm.
but I don't want to give a presentation because Julian's was quite extensive enough.
Cool. Yeah, I'm happy I dropped in. Happy I got the schedule correctly.
Well, I definitely appreciate everybody joining. And I will have the recording up on YouTube in the next day or so.
Cool.
But keep in mind, I won't probably have a meeting in July, but I'm hoping to have one in August. And I'm also thinking having a few mixed ones where we have both on-site and Zoom. You know, I did that last month. So
Alrighty.
well, if there's nothing else, we could adjourn the meeting. Okay, well, I'm gonna adjourn this now. Thank you all for coming. I will. Okay.
Bye.
Buzz?
Bye.
Thank